Hello and welcome to NewsLaundry. Today we have with us a Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Shashi Tharoor, a very accomplished man with a very long resume, which we'll get into later. But my first question is regarding the media, the social media and mainstream. You have been listed as the most influential Indian on social media by Pinstorm, beating Amir Khan, Salman Khan, Amitabh Bachchan. What makes you so attractive on the social media, you think?
I have absolutely no idea. I hope it's because I engage with those who relate to me. When we speak of social media with me, it's just Twitter. I'm not on Facebook, though there are various imposters pretending to be me. I'm only on Twitter. But there I do make it a point every day to respond to questions from people, to retweet interesting things people send me, and to say things that I hope they will find interesting and not merely provocative, which is all they were looking for earlier on.
Which
And
you did provide.
Well, unwittingly in some cases, but yes. At the end of the day, however, it's being interesting that matters rather than being provocative, and I hope that I've remained that.
Do you get a lot of abuse as well?
There's a fair amount of that. You know, I can't help being a Congress MP in a social media environment that is very strongly right-wing in our country. I mean, the pro-Hindutva elements are widespread on Twitter and Facebook and the internet generally. And as a result, there is more than one's fair share of abuse in terms of the general trend of our country's public opinion. But I also manage sometimes to engage fairly constructively with some of the people of that persuasion as well. So it doesn't necessarily always end up translating into abuse.
And mainstream media, you think there have been times when they've been too kind to you and there have been times when they've been too harsh?
I've not noticed them being too kind. I'd love it if somebody pointed that out to me. No, I thought that during my troubles, is the way I tend to refer to a particular phase of my life, my first year in politics and in government, I thought they were just as unfair as they could possibly be. I mean, not just unfair, but literally libelous, except that I was advised not to go to court over
the media.
And there were lies. I mean, there was repeated publication of lies without the slightest attempt to issue corrections, even when facts are pointed out.
And why don't you take that on? I mean, why is it that the media should get away with that?
Well, they shouldn't get away with it. I've said it in a few places. Outlook asked me to do a piece on the media, and I mildly pointed out a couple of examples, and I've done so on a couple of other occasions. But honestly, in our culture, and I see the logic of that, it's almost best to just move on. But I sometimes find myself on very friendly terms with people whose publications have reported the nastiest, vilest lies about my wife and myself.
I don't think they've been...
And it's been rather difficult to...
They've been very kind to you also. I understand the Kochi phase was... I mean, there were full-on attacks on you and your wife. But you haven't ever noticed that they're too kind to you? Because I think sometimes they are very kind.
Oh, please reassure me. I'm delighted to hear that.
But you don't feel it at all?
Kind? Where have they been kind?
I mean, just that, the kind of space that someone gets because, he's well-spoken, he's obviously charming and good-looking. I mean, the very shallow reasons for which media does sometimes get a lot of flack, a lot of people are at the benefit from that too, because, they want you on screen, they want you on their
I don't think they're being kind to me. I mean, to be very honest, I think they want me because it's good for them. I actually end up saying no to 9 requests out of 10, as my office will testify. And the reason, quite simply, is I don't feel the need to be out there with a soundbite on every topic, which was perhaps one of my initial mistakes in entering
And they were more than keen to get soundbites from you.
They were, and of course, they were then promptly twisted out of shape and distorted and attacked maliciously. And I learned that coming from having lived too long in the West, perhaps, 29 years abroad, during which cooperating with the media was one of the things I was doing for the United Nations, I assumed I should do the same in India and paid a price for it. So after that, I have dramatically cut back.
But you think
I do very, very, very few interviews in relation to the number of invitations I get. So if the invitations I get outstrip the ones I do by a factor of 9 to 1, it must mean that they want me, not because they're being kind to me, but because they feel that I have something to contribute to their show.
Sure. But what I'm trying to say is that the charm aspect of it, and a lot of people describe you as very charming. In fact, I'm going to ask a few questions that we had asked our people on Twitter to, what they wanted to ask you. There's a lot of about, your hair flicks and stuff. So for reasons such as those, Shashi Tharoor was someone everyone wanted to interview. Now, when you go out, let's say campaigning, or when you become a celebrity of sorts, even politicians are kind of celebrities, and especially the whole your UN background. I mean, do you think that to a large extent a lot of people are charmed by you, not on the basis of your stand on any policy issues, but purely because he speaks so well, he's a fine orator, he looks nice? So isn't
But
that,
you know, when you say
do you
somebody
see the
speaks-
advantage of that as well?
I hope so, but I mean, when you say somebody speaks well, surely the content of what they're saying is what people are relating to. I mean, if people are watching YouTube, uploads of my speeches, I'm assuming it's not because of the way I speak, but because of the content that I convey through the way I speak. At least that's always been my pride, and I've done that all my adult life. In fact, all my life really, because I
With
started
the UN. In fact,
early on in school and college as a debater. So
viewers
it was what you have to say that also has to appeal.
Okay. Although in the age of television that can be compromised as long as the style is great. Do you don't think so?
I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those guys who doesn't watch a lot of television, embarrassingly enough, even when I'm on it. So I can't speak with authority about that.
Okay. Our viewers would like to know, you served the UN for 29 years. And in fact, you finished your PhD at 22. You were one of those overachiever types, weren't you?
I was just terrified of running out of scholarship funds, so I worked very hard.
Okay. And then you were from 2001 to 2007 the Under Secretary General, and you were in the running for the Secretary Generalship of the UN. How does that work? Is that very similar to the presidential lobbying that happens? Like, what didn't work out that you didn't
with a smaller electorate. The electorate for the Secretary General's job is 15 countries on the Security Council.
Did India back you?
India was the one. If India hadn't nominated me, I wouldn't have run. So yes, India nominated me, and you have to be nominated by a country, and it helps if it's your country. So I'm very glad it was mine. But having said that, it's 15 voters, 15 members of the Security Council, of 5 of whom have a veto. And though I came very close in the first ballot, I had 10 votes to Mr. Ban Ki-moon's 12. On subsequent ballots, when finally the permanent members who had a veto revealed their hands, it turned out that I had the negative vote of a permanent member.
Who?
It was, we discovered later, the United States.
Is that right?
Bush administration.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think there were 2 or 3 reasons, but we can only talk about the ones that are publicly known.
We can even talk about the rest.
The ones that are publicly known, the then US ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, revealed in his very indiscreet memoir that his instructions were, we don't want a strong Secretary General, quote unquote. The second reason was to do with the fact that there was a perception that a Secretary General who could appeal above the heads of governments to public opinion, somebody who could, for example, go on television and speak to the world, which is something I'd done for the UN for some time, might not be something that some governments would be totally comfortable with. At least one government, one administration was not particularly comfortable with that. And I think a third factor, which is an important factor, is that the Koreans mounted an extremely effective, very generously funded, in fact, lavish campaign. And they're very good campaigners. And that too got them a lot of support early on, even before I had entered the fray.
But even if that hadn't happened, just the first reason you said was reason enough for you not to get the seat, because if the US says no, then it's no.
That's right. In fact, if the US had told us at the beginning we're going to veto this guy, I'm sure we would not have gone forward. No one wanted to go in for a certain defeat. We went in expecting that we had a good chance to win. And as I said, we came close. I was second out of a list of 7 contenders who included a deputy prime minister, a couple of foreign ministers, the serving president of a member state, Latvia, and a prince. So it wasn't too bad a list of people to come ahead of, but I still lost.
So tell me, considering this is how the UN works, and now you've seen it after having served it 29 years, that the US is the UN, you think it has any relevance?
No, that's not right. The US is not the UN. The US, like Russia, Britain, France, and China, can block certain things with their veto. But the US cannot dictate to the rest. Even with the Iraq War,
can disobey the UN.
When the Iraq War, the US and the UK, 2 of the 5 permanent members came to the Security Council requesting for the UN's blessing for what was going to be their invasion of Iraq. They didn't get it. So you still need to persuade the others to come along.
Yeah, but they still went ahead with it.
They still went ahead with it. But then, even if the UN was irrelevant to the actual prosecution of the war, it became indispensable to the ensuing peace. The moment they had
What
conquered
peace?
Baghdad,
Where?
the moment they had conquered Baghdad, they had to come back to the UN because without UN recognition, the new arrangements could not have worked. For example, there was no longer a legitimate government of Iraq unless the UN had recognized it. They couldn't have sold a drop of Iraqi oil on the world market without that kind of recognition.
So does the UN
So the UN has an important role of international legitimacy, very important.
So the role it plays is not so much ensuring conflict doesn't happen, but
No, it's that too. Because not every
they're not
conflict
successful at that. I mean, I
No,
saw a
but very
documentary on
rare. The UN is
Rwanda,
very-
and the Clinton administration was in power at that time.
That's right.
And his assistant, this is on record, he said in an interview, that they ensured that the word genocide was not used
Correct.
in the resolution that was passed, because the entire
That would have
idea,
triggered some action, exactly.
because the reason the UN was set up was so that there is never again a genocide. So if they don't use that word, because that would make it incumbent for them to act, because the Clinton administration didn't want it, they aren't really doing the job they were supposed to. I'm saying the UN can exist, but then the UN should be not the United Nations who prevents conflict, but the United Nations that kind of does the administration when someone shits all over the place, you know.
No, it's more than that. You know, Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the UN, said it best 50 years ago when he said that the UN was not created to take mankind to paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell. It can't be perfect. It's an organization of human beings and member states, none of whom is perfect.
You don't think the US has a disproportionately large say in what happens? Or
it does, but it's a mirror. The UN is a mirror of the world. It reflects the inequalities in the world. It reflects our hopes and our compromises, our fears and our wishes, and it also reflects the power balances of the world as it is. The US is very powerful. In fact, at the time that you're talking about, the US's military strength outstripped the entire rest of the world combined in terms of defense budgets.
And yet they didn't go into Rwanda.
So the fact is that the US has a certain disproportionate weight when it sits around any table with any other countries. So why should the UN somehow be seen as an organization whose sole purpose is to neutralize one power? It can't work that way. We want to leverage and use the US's power in the interests of the international community, of all of humanity, and the UN does a pretty good job there.
Okay, you worked there for 29 years, right? One doesn't pay taxes when one works at the UN, right?
No, you pay a sort of internal tax. In other words, they declare a gross salary and you get only a net salary. And the difference, which is about 30%, is cut off your salary and given to a number of, it's given to your own country. So the Indian government would get my bit, then it's given to the host government.
So one does pay tax. So this is a myth
So
that when you were at the UN.
So it's not a tax in the normal sense in that I don't file a tax return. UN officials don't file a tax return, but they pay what is called a staff assessment, which is de facto a tax.
I see. Okay, now when you said that the US did want a very strong Secretary General.
I didn't say that, Mr. John Bolton
Yeah,
said that.
Mr. Bolton said that. You think that's one of the reasons you won't get a portfolio and haven't since the co-chief fracas?
No. I offered to resign for the very simple reason we were in the middle of a budget session and this nonsense in the media
But it's gone, it's done.
had gone completely out of control. The opposition was itself not only exploiting it but paralyzed the day of Parliament, literally the eve of presenting the budget. And I knew I could not afford to be an embarrassment to the government when the budget had to pass. You know, in our parliamentary system, it's the single most important event of the parliamentary calendar every year is presenting and passing the government's budget.
Unless
In fact,
there's
the
a
budget
nuke
fails,
deal.
the government falls. Sorry?
Unless there's a nuke deal.
No, even with, well, a vote of confidence also, the government would fall. But without a vote of confidence, certainly, something like
No, but that happened. The chapter's closed. In fact, Kochi
So
doesn't
that's
have a
what-
team anymore.
No,
I mean,
no.
it's been a while.
Not
I mean,
only is the chapter
Mr.
closed, I've
Vilasrao
demanded
Deshmukh resigned when the whole Mumbai attacks took place, when his son went there. He's back to something or the other. So, come on. I mean, one does get some sort of ministry. And if you do have such an impressive resume and you're such an accomplished person, surely...
Aren't you asking the wrong guy? I'm not the one who appoints
No, but
people to
do you
to
think...
government.
Okay, so let me just ask you directly. Do you think in the current political scenario, the way politics plays out in India, especially with large parties, a person who has his own point of view is not going to have a platform to express it?
I don't know. You've just given me a platform. I have a platform. I publish books. I write
No,
columns.
come on. This is
I have
nothing
plenty
compared-
of platforms.
No, but if you have an official position, you don't think that's inconvenient? I mean, just how the presidential elections take place, how people vote, it's a party whip. You don't represent the people you're representing. You do what the party high command tells you. I mean, you've come from a culture where you can disagree with the president being a Democrat and you can say so, but no disciplinary action is going to be taken against you. That culture doesn't exist here. Does that not make it claustrophobic?
I wouldn't say claustrophobic. It is a different culture. But you know, every institution has its own rules and ways of doing things. I would speak very frankly at the United Nations, but I would speak very frankly in private. And there were things, for example, that I could say to the Secretary General, who apart from being my boss was a close friend, which I would never say in front of a third party or certainly in front of a public media. So the same thing to some degree applies. You see, we are in public life in politics. And I may have views which differ from my parties, but I've learned, particularly over the last couple of years, to keep my disagreements private. I think that when I was here in my very first few months in public life, I was probably a little too willing to air my opinions. And I say that in very much the Indian context. Because India is the kind of country where that things happen. Well, our media would not in any case be exempt from blame for this, because the media deliberately manufactures controversies in the quest of TRPs. And so if expressing a mild dissent then gets blown out of all proportion into a so-called controversy, then you're better off not expressing the mild dissent, but just saying it perhaps less mildly behind closed doors.
Sure, but to put that on the media's doorstep is a bit unfair, because let's say it is immature the way they play it up. The leaders, the high commands are not immature. I mean, they know what's happening. They know, dekhiye, Shashi Tharoor has done this, or cattle class and holy cows. I mean, the people who are watching it aren't stupid either. So, I mean, if there's a lack of maturity
there is such a thing as creating a media image. I mean, look, I spent 29 years and every one of my UN assignments, the UN used to wheel me out to speak to the world media, particularly to media that was critical of the UN bodies. I was on BBC's Hard Talk twice, the first UN official to so be. I was on Fox News, which is famous for UN bashing. Never once in 29 years was I remotely ever considered to have put a foot wrong, a word wrong, or ever called a controversialist. When I come to India, within weeks, everything I say is not only put under a microscope, there is this relentless image portrayed in the media that I am an object of controversy, that I'm constantly saying the wrong thing. I will stand by every single one of the so-called controversies that the media manufactured about me. But it is part of the media culture, because certainly controversy sells. At least you can call it breaking news.
But who's buying?
Well, apparently the public is, right?
And the party high command. Because what I'm saying is
the party will be conscious of a perception, of a media perception. And if there is a widespread perception that X is a something, the party will certainly have to bear that in mind. Well, I've spent 2 years since then demonstrating that this X is not that something. But the fact still is that during the first year, there was no, you know, if somebody actually sat down, as some friends did outside India, and looked at it, they said none of these would have been controversies in any other democracy in the world. But they are, unfortunately, controversies in ours. And because they are, we have to adjust ourselves to the reality of the media culture and the political culture of India.
Or try to change it.
Well, I mean, if you can be in a position to change it, so much the better. But sometimes things are too strong for the most sincere attempts to change things, and you end up coming a cropper. It doesn't mean that I will ever sort of tailor my conscience to fit today's politically acceptable ideas. I will always have my principles and my integrity, and that will never change.
And therefore you don't think you'll
But
ever
I may not always say it publicly. That will perhaps be the
You think that'll get in the way of your getting a ministry?
I think if I were to constantly be speaking my mind publicly and disagreeing, it could become a problem. But as I said, over the last couple of years, I think it's fair to say that there hasn't been a Shashi Tharoor related controversy in the Indian media. So I must have been learning some lessons, right?
No, but,
unless you create one after this interview.
I'll try, but no promises yet. Are other politicians resentful? For example, people have been working at the grassroots for the party for the longest time, and let's face it, in the present political culture, no one does it because of some selfless service. Everybody wants something, even if it's not a huge kickback, just a nice house to live in. I mean, I myself have had an MP tell me during the RTI days when amendments were suggested that on the floor I cannot disagree with Manmohan Singh's amendments because I cannot afford this house on my own. And he's a very clean man. So what I'm saying is no one does it. So when you come from the UN, 29 years, you've lived the good life, and then you come here, you get this ticket and you win because you're charming and all that.
I hope it was more than that, but anyway. All right.
And really, where do you think Rahul Gandhi wins?
Oh, I think he's
done what?
Well, he conveys a great deal of passion and interest to the voters, and the voters respond.
Okay. So you think other politicians, they see you come, get this seat, and get the Minister of State for External Affairs, Surely they must be resentful, saying that we've, kicked our butts all our lives working here
You
in the
know,
sun.
no,
and
I fully
here
understand
this-
that. I fully understand. I
Does
think
that
it would be
happen,
true
and
in any
do you feel
profession.
it?
I think at the very beginning, I certainly would have. I mean, I didn't expect to feel it, but I began feeling it. My back was perforated a few times, and I realized that there were some
Daggers that
there were some challenges there. But the fact is, you can't blame people for being resentful precisely for that reason. It would be true in any other profession. A journalist who's slaved all along and done good work and expects to be promoted to the next rung up the ladder, and somebody comes in from the outside, he would be resentful within the media. And the same thing would apply to any other profession, I suspect. So certainly in politics, my own perception is that it's not wrong for people to resent, but the fact is that this is life. Life is sometimes unfair. And I didn't get parachuted into the Rajya Sabha. I actually came in, fought hard, campaigned 18, 20-hour days in the hot sun, in the hottest month of the year in Kerala, went out to the fields and the tea shops and the streets, and I won those votes fair and square. So I earned that seat. And I
So
think
is
that's
Shashi
something-
Tharoor saying that people who go through the Rajya Sabha don't deserve it for the first time?
I'm just saying that I didn't have it easy.
Sure, I understand.
I worked for what I got, and I got it hard. And I must say I could have lost. The seat was held the previous 2 elections by the CPI. So I actually had to take away a seat that was held by another party and held in 2 successive elections. So it's not as if I was just put into a safe seat where any congressman would have won or whatever. I had to work for it, and I did.
Okay, now you've adjusted your outspoken nature, or you've adjusted speaking your mind in a platform that's not public and will not get you into trouble with your party.
No, look, I'm also writing a column every
sure,
Friday, and in that I've expressed some very candid
No,
views.
in fact, we'll come to your view.
I'm not censoring myself. I am speaking out. I have a book coming out in July on India's place in the world, where I discuss Indian foreign policy and foreign policy making. I am putting my views out there because I believe it's my responsibility as an elected public official to contribute to public discourse in this country. It's just that I'm not, I'm not anxious to
about
be
it.
typecast as some sort of controversialist, because my interest is actually in constructively having my ideas embraced or valued by those in power. There's no point just becoming a controversialist. I'm not interested in that.
Okay,
And I never was.
you filed a case against Arindam Chaudhary's The Sunday Indian.
Yes, finally the worm turned, yeah.
Okay, what did they say that pissed you off so much, which the rest didn't get that?
It wasn't that the rest didn't. I mean, I was very, very pissed about a number of things, and I will remain deeply unhappy.
Who are the channels who you think went after you with malice and venom?
There's absolutely no point getting into that. It was always across the board anyway. I mean, I don't think there was a print publication or a TV channel that didn't get their share of piling on the agony. And I mean, there were some honourable exceptions that unfortunately don't matter. I mean, NewsX was the only channel that was completely fair and objective throughout, not one nasty piece. And I'm afraid hardly anyone watched NewsX. So the result is that.
Why did the Sunday magazine get your ire?
So what happened was that during that time, I actually did speak to friends in the legal profession who said it's simply not worth suing, that you will expend an enormous amount of emotional energy, and the thing will drag on for a while. At the end of the day, you may not get much satisfaction out of it, and the thing will be forgotten, let it be forgotten. And I took that advice, though of course these things are not really forgotten, particularly in the age of Google, where people can still find these things out there. So at the end, I'm not sure I was well advised. So I finally decided, all right, that phase is now behind. I don't want to stir up trouble, but if anyone does it again, I really have to show that I won't take it again. And Sunday Indian wrote a very, very vicious piece with all sorts of ridiculously concocted allegations.
That you have Swiss bank accounts and black money stashed there and stuff.
And all of that. And I said, the hell with this. This has to absolutely.
What's the status now?
Well, it takes a long time. It takes a very long time. It's now, 8 months or 9 months since I filed that case. And I think we're still, having the other side asking for deferments and notices being filed. And I'm sure I'll have to wait. I'll have to be patient. But I'm not going to give up. I do want the case to go through, simply because I just think that if one can make an example of one set of liars, perhaps another set of people will not tell the same story.
It wouldn't hurt if you win the 10 crore defamation case, huh?
Well, I certainly won't keep a penny of it for myself. But
really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But no.
We're looking for VC funding, so
No, I do run some charitable work that could
I
use
see.
the funding too. But I'm not even expecting a specific amount. The amount is simply there to focus the minds of the.
You just
people
want to
who
make an
see.
example of it, that you can't get away with this nonsense each time. Okay, the IPL controversy, of course, all sorts of stuff was written about your wife Sunanda, and finally you said hell with the stake and you gave it away, or you signed it off.
I didn't. It was Sunanda.
Sunanda.
Who had
but
actually, as it turned out, even I wasn't fully informed. She had paid for that stake, and she returned it for exactly the same amount of money that she had paid for it. So
which is a pretty good deal because the team kind of wound up.
No, well, she never got the money back, but that's all she was. In other words, it was not that she had something free that she turned away. She had paid for stakes, and she said, "I'm selling it back to the company." That's what happened.
And
but,
did it really?
But since the team wound up, in any case, no one has made any money on this, and the original promoters themselves have lost a lot of money on
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
So you want to revive that because you were doing it because you thought that your state should also have a cricket team. Are you a keen cricketer?
I'm a very, very keen cricket nut. I've been writing about cricket for decades, as many of you know. I played very mediocre levels of cricket, but I played in places like Geneva and Singapore, which are not exactly world capitals of cricket.
Sure.
And I had a lot of fun. I used to go out every Sunday, dressed like some distant cousin of the great Gatsby, clutching a bat in rain or sunshine. And yeah, I used to bat and bowl a bit. In fact, I played for a couple of years for the European Nuclear Research Center, the Centre Européen de la Recherche Nucléaire,
Really?
on the border of Geneva, called CERN. And they used to put their cricket records on the internet. And for several years after I left Geneva, my name was up there for a 7 for 35 in one match and a 65 not out in an opening century partnership and so on. So I've had my name, but the fact is, it wasn't that. I saw the IPL as something that was a modern 21st century business venture that in many ways would help open the closed minds of a very statist, non-entrepreneurial friendly Kerala economy. So I saw it as more than cricket. Yes, I was cricket crazy. I saw the enthusiasm of young people in Kerala for cricket, which had not previously been a popular sport. Well, they've been mainly football and athletics and swimming. Cricket was actually very distant when I was growing up as a child, but going back now and seeing, thanks to TV, I'm sure, how much kids are practicing cricket everywhere, I knew this would really strike a good chord, and it did. Young people today still appreciate what I tried to do to bring a team there. But as I said, it wasn't just bringing a team. I really thought it would help Kerala. It would sort of bust open a mindset. And who knows, if it had all worked out better, it might have done, but we'll never really know, will we?
Now, regarding your tweets, you've got a lot of flack for that entire cattle class and this whole austerity thing that's now come back in with, the planning commissions, Lou's also getting an unfair share of wall-to-wall coverage on TV. What is your view on austerity? I mean, do you think we indulge our MPs and our policymakers too much? Should they be given the kind of logistic support the way they live that they are? I mean, is austerity just a big sham? Because in any case, the amount we spend on you guys is ridiculous. I mean, you think a Lodi estate, you don't...
Well, no, let's move back from that. You're asking a whole lot of unrelated questions in one, actually. When you ask about what
austerity,
the taxpayer
first let's go with...
on elected
in that context, when they say he shouldn't fly this or he shouldn't stay in that hotel, I mean, when the overall pie is that big, that's just a drop.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. Certainly, I think that it's done for largely symbolic reasons. In fact, the difference between a full fare economy ticket and a business ticket is often quite marginal. But you don't sit in business in order to send an example. That's political symbolism. That is really not a serious dent in the sort of financial numbers that we're supposed to be doing. So in that sense, I agree that there is a certain level of, shall we say, a gap between the symbol and the actual rupees that it translates into, that it saves the taxpayer. So, but also on the larger question of austerity in economic hard times, there are two very distinct schools of thought. I'm very much more of a Keynesian, that I feel a government in financial trouble should actually encourage spending, not have austerity. Clearly, that is not the prevailing orthodoxy in our government right now. That's not the orthodoxy in our government right now. Austerity is where we stand. But, obviously, as a loyal member of the ruling party, I will fall in line. But if I were sort of making policy, it would probably be a sort of stimulus for the economy rather than austerity. would have been my approach.
You think?
And then your other question about how much we're spending. See, you asked a number of questions in
Sure.
one. The fact is that the MPs of India are amongst the lowest paid MPs in the world. They get 50,000 rupees a month, which very frankly, it's very difficult given the
Inflation.
expenses you're obliged to have.
Right.
Even before inflation reared its ugly head in recent months, you have to maintain your own transport, a car and petrol. You have to maintain staff here. You have to maintain staff in your constituency. You have to deal with unexpected visitors all the time and give them tea and snacks or whatever.
We got juice. Everyone got juice. There are like 10 of us and we all got juice.
There you are. So the fact is, you can't do this easily on 50,000 rupees. Now, the logic is that, of course, an MP is supposed to have other sources of income, legal sources of income, one hopes. But the fact is that many MPs are full-time politicians who've done nothing else. I write columns to supplement my income. There are business people in politics whose businesses make them the money they spend. But for many others, this is actually not a particularly generous salary. And in many ways, it worries me that the public thinks our MPs are pampered. They're given very specific allowances which cannot be turned into cash. So you have a certain number of plane tickets, but you use them to get back to your constituency.
Or train, or phone, or bijli.
And last year, I used more tickets than the government gave me, because even when Parliament is in session, I go back to Thiruvananthapuram every weekend. Otherwise, my voters will say, our MP is not here. Why isn't he attending every wedding and every funeral in our constituency? Well, sorry, you elected me to go to Delhi. Sorry, that's not good enough. We need you here. So the constant presence, these tickets are used up very quickly. Then you've got a situation where you have a house. The house was built in the 1930s. The government is not exactly paying today's market price for a bungalow in Lodi estate.
Notionally
and therefore,
it is.
Well, if there was a decision made that the government would sell all these bungalows on the market and make crores for itself, and instead spend part of those crores building alternative housing, the government would be free to do so. I'm assuming calculations have been made that suggest that it would not be cost effective to do that, because the cost of putting up an equivalent amount of housing and acquiring the land or whatever to do so might be just as bad as doing
No, what
this.
about if everyone's given an allowance and said, now you figure out a house for yourself in the city? You don't think that's possible?
Well,
Other countries do it.
The allowances would have to be huge.
Of course they would, but they would be nowhere close.
At the UN, there wasn't even an allowance. I was just paid a salary that was deemed adequate for me to rent a house.
Exactly. Even policymakers and lawmakers there are given allowance and they find the house. What I'm saying is that, let's say one doesn't rent it, sell it. The rental for the kind of bungalows that MPs get, just a fraction of that would be enough for them to find comfortable housing elsewhere. And this money could be used, and you're right, some estimations have been made, some are way off, they're just all numbers flying around. In fact, we want to do a study to figure out what the number would be. But you don't think that would send out a better message, because you just scatter them around rather than there is being enclave of privilege which has a complete different look?
No, I think the logic is a bit different. The logic is precisely because we don't reward politicians in terms of generous salaries and so on.
That's
we make it
what
up for them by giving them support in kind. And honestly, I do think the numbers would not wash very much in favor of your argument if somebody sat down and worked them out. To begin with, if you actually suddenly put 500 houses in the market may also drop a bit. You may not get the astronomical prices these are notionally worth today, because there are so few of them available. But even if you did, in relation to India's annual budget or India's annual GDP, it's a drop in the bucket. Even all these government.
Then what if I were to conveniently flip my argument and say, the symbolism that you spoke about, these bungalows were built for a white sahab, where they had piche gwala rahega, there'll be this, there'll be that. And unlike Israel, where when they got their country, the parliament sat in a tent and the buildings were used for schools and hospitals. In India, as soon as the buildings were vacated, our president occupied, a 340-room mansion, and everyone occupied this, and the schools and hospitals can wait. I mean, the symbolism argument, let's say, I were to be convenient.
Let me say that if you manage to persuade the decision makers on this, to do that, I'll be happy to vacate my house.
No, I'm just saying, what would you, if you were asked, Mr. Tharoor, what do you think one should do? Is this
no,
how
I
it should
actually...
Because I'm not talking about Delhi, I'm talking about Jaipur, you go to Bombay. I mean, I've traveled the country,
Sure,
and
all
I've
the
seen
state
it
capitals have
every
similar
city. It is.
Yeah. No, I just think that it's something which, to my mind, is a very modest contribution that the government makes to the well-being of people elected in office. And I don't begrudge it to those who've got bigger houses than me, closer to Parliament or to their ministries than me. And I certainly hope that people don't begrudge me being able to to get to Parliament every day from here. It's in many, many ways, I think, a false issue. I think we're trying to make something out of what is really marginal. I would rather we spent some of the resources that we would expend on your scheme actually building more hospitals and schools as we need to, than distracting ourselves with what would in the end be another exercise in empty symbolism. And I suspect that any
real numbers wouldn't be of value there.
The numbers would not be of value very much and would disappear very quickly, is my suspicion.
Okay, before we get to the
what percentage of our budget they would be too is another question.
Though actually we will conduct a study and come back with real numbers.
Sure,
we're going to do that. Just you reviewed this book for the Outlook, I think, The Mushroom Shaped Doubt, right? It's a book by Mr. Verghese Koithara.
Oh, it's not called Mushroom Shaped Cloud, it's called Managing India's Nuclear Forces.
No, that's a book. I'm saying your article is called.
Is that what they call it? I haven't seen my...
It's called Mushroom Shaped Cloud. The book is Managing India's Nuclear Forces. It's by Verghese Koithara, is that? Koithara. In that you have said, you've quoted him, "It is dangerous," Koithara argues, "to ignore the issues involved in managing..." Sorry, I should actually inform the viewers. This is a book about managing India's nukes by a gentleman called Verghese Koithara.
Who's a retired admiral, yeah.
Yeah. And
a strategist, somebody who thinks about India's strategy.
Right. And Dr. Tharoor has reviewed that book, in the review you have said, "It is dangerous," Koithara argues, "to ignore the issues involved in managing our nukes effectively. Our political leadership's relationship with its own military is barren in inverted commas because his word, leading to the exclusion of the armed forces from the very area of the expertise, national security planning." In this scenario, your party wouldn't be very happy to see that, you don't think?
Well, I think this is an intellectual exercise in reflecting what somebody who knows how these things work.
And you obviously agree with him.
Well, I'm reviewing a book, so the authority is not the reviewer, the authority is the writer of the book. And he says authoritatively that the relationship we have right now excludes the military from national security planning, and he knows more about that than I do or most of the readers of Outlook do. So I would say, yes, I quote him and say that if that is true, that is simply not good.
Okay.
I have a lot of respect for the military. I spent 7.5 years in UN peacekeeping, dealing with generals from around the world and officers, colonels and above from various nationalities, and I developed a very healthy respect, both for the military professional as a professional, and for the quality of the Indian military professionals I came across in my UN peacekeeping days. Right. And ever since, I consider myself a friend of the Indian military, and I believe that we should give them a lot of respect and we should really value
do you think we do?
The contribution they can. I think in some respects we do. I think the Indian military has
we being the Aam Aadmi, or we being the
Aam Aadmi, we being India as a whole.
Of course, the Aam Aadmi,
society,
I mean, my dad was a Fauji, and whenever he travelled with his uniform, of course, people just...
But I'm not sure that our bureaucracy and our political system give the military quite the importance they deserve. Certainly in petty things like protocol, our bureaucracy has ensured that they outrank people in the forge who are actually far senior to them. But in protocol terms, they rank below mid-level bureaucrats. This is something which has been institutionalized over some time, and I think is simply unnecessary and wrong. Then politically, if indeed they're not involved in national security planning, that's wrong. I think we should open up even jobs in the defense ministry to serving officers in uniform, so that their professional expertise can inform some of our defense thinking.
That's a pretty radical suggestion.
Sure, I'm happy to make it.
Do you think it'll ever be accepted?
Well, right now, no. But I think that it's the sort of thinking we need to open ourselves to be ready in a very sophisticated 21st century world, where the days of the gifted amateur are, I'm afraid, frankly, being numbered in every field. And we have this long tradition of the generalist bureaucrat who will run a public sector corporation today and run our defense tomorrow. The truth is that being in some fields requires a certain level of skill and expertise, which we need to get into the system from where we can find it in the system. And in terms of national security issues, the military is certainly it.
Okay, and you've ended the book review with, "This book is a wake-up call to those in charge of India's nukes. It is a call that must be heeded on all our interests." Who is in charge of India's nukes? I mean,
well, our government, I think.
Who? I mean, there must be one or two people who say, okay, yes, nuke, like the US president has the code. Who is in charge here?
I don't know who has the code in our country. I'm not sure that even that is a publicly available piece of information. I'm assuming that it's a combination of the Prime Minister and some of the top scientists, because the DRDO and the scientists of our establishment seem to be the ones who've kept control of all of this. But certainly it's not the
country should
generals.
know. I mean, you think, shouldn't we know who's in charge of India's nukes? I mean,
I think the safe answer is the Prime Minister of India, or the President of India officially, but on the Prime Minister is in charge of our nukes. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces.
okay. So right now Pratibha Patil is in charge of India's nukes.
Absolutely, but she wouldn't
That scares me.
She wouldn't fire them without the Prime Minister asking her to do so.
Okay, now we'll just get to some questions from Twitter. For Shashi Tharoor, who's obviously a Twitter darling. You've just got so much Twitter. I'll start off with the most difficult questions first. This comes.
Have you been doing that all afternoon?
Look, come on, this comes from a gentleman called Abhimanyu Singh. My question to Shashi Tharoor is, just why is he such a cool dude?
Oh, well. I didn't know I was a cool dude, so how can I answer it?
So many people think you're a really cool dude. Like, what is it?
Glad to hear it. You tell me.
I
Somebody who
don't
thinks
know.
I'm a cool dude.
I heard about this actually. Did you ever have a scene with Meera Nair when you were in college?
Not at all, not at all. She was my Cleopatra and I was Antony in a play.
And then you kissed her or something?
Well, I kissed her on stage, but it was very discreetly
So did you make
done.
the most of it then?
No, my back was turned to the audience, and I actually sort of made it a point to miss her lips. But the audience couldn't see. The audience imagined that we were actually kissing.
Was she hot?
She's a very good-looking teenager.
Okay, she's still very hot, I think. I worked on Monsoon Wedding. I had a huge crush on her. Okay. Someone says show business was toxically malicious and mean-spirited. I thought it was lovely. Was it a take on Amitabh Bachchan?
No, you know, both.
Because I thought you were talking about Amitabh Bachchan.
All my fiction is sort of uses real life and real facts for a springboard. All my 3 novels, I can say all my fiction, my short stories, in some cases are not. But because I was doing that, I took elements from the Bollywood world I was satirizing, and I took aspects of Amitabh's life, and I took the accident from Sanjay Khan's accident, and I created this composite megastar character. And I made it a point to mention, I think, Amitabh Bachchan as a separate person somewhere in the narrative, just to make it clear this isn't him. But he told me he'd read the book, so I'm assuming that it didn't bother him because he didn't complain about it.
Okay. Then someone called Real Bhakti, Paras Desai asks, what's the outcome of the IPL probe against him? There is no probe.
No, there is. I had insisted on inquiry. I was interrogated and grilled at great length.
By who? Who's
by the Enforcement Directorate.
It's on? There's a probe right now?
Well, no, as far as I'm aware, there is a continuing probe against all the IPL teams. As far as I'm aware, my own inquiry is over in that they've interrogated me at length and found nothing to go against me on, and they've interrogated my wife at length as well. But we insisted upon it. We wanted ourselves to have a fair hearing and to know what, if anything, we could be charged with, and there is nothing.
Okay, and then there's another question. When does the penance in Thiruvananthapuram end? Because it's perceived that you were sent there as punishment and it's been way too long. You're required back in the center.
I don't think it's a penance. It's a very beautiful town. And in fact, it has some of the most pleasant scenery you can imagine in India. The Kovalam beach and the palm fronds.
Sure.
And when I'm there, I don't feel it's a penance at all.
Thiruvananthapuram also has the first India coffee house, right? That round building.
The one near the sea, absolutely, yeah. Though that's, I'm afraid, on its last legs, I think. And will seriously need renovation or revamping or reinvention.
Like the
but it's still there.
Party.
It's still there with the view of the sea, with the view of the Arabian Sea.
I see. There are way too many questions and I won't take any more of your time. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Nice talking to you.